Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I joined the clergy to help people and to make a difference. For the most part, I like to think that's true. When someone came to me and poured out his soul, it is my obligation to take that confession with me to the grave. There are no exceptions, and those who do give up the details are often excommunicated from the church. You might imagine that there are instances where this proves to be a crisis of conscience for the pastor involved. I'm here to relate one of those instances to you. Most might think that by doing so, I am breaking the pastor penitent privilege, but there are certain loopholes which protect me. I will explain them first before we get started. The confessionary will never be named, so do not ask in the comments who it might be. It will do you no good. The events have long passed, and most parties involved are dead. Only God may be their judge now for their actions. Certain aspects of the account will require a specific time or place. Those portions of the story I will be using public records that do not break the seal of confession. I joined the priesthood at the instance of my father, one himself for well over 30 years. There can be no higher calling for a man, he told me, beaming with pride as I had announced I had been appointed over a local youth ministry. I felt confident that I could make a difference helping troubled teens since I was one myself. But as soon as I had finished my vows, the devil saw to it that I would be tested. The morning in question was a quiet one. I had just finished cleaning the pews and unlocking the doors to our chapel when I saw a young man standing not far from me, shaking like a leaf. "Are you all right? It's nearly 30 degrees outside. You could catch a death of a cold," I called out to him. The boy didn't make a reply, and for a short moment, as I finished setting things up for morning worship, I forgot about him. We have a fairly sophisticated security system in my congregation that gives us a chance to view the exterior straight from the safety of the church. When the system kicked on, I was quite surprised to see that the young man was still standing out there, even though it had begun to sleet. Feeling my heart go out for him, I went across the chapel to grab a warm blanket, and I called out to him from the doorway again. "Come in from the cold, my child," I urged him. At first it seemed like he was going to ignore my offer, but something inside of him convinced him to accept. Once inside, I guided him towards the mess hall and remarked, "You look like you haven't eaten in days. We have a surplus of food we save for the homeless. What can I get you?" The young man said nothing, tugging at the edge of his blanket and shivering uncontrollably as I took a better look at his appearance. It was no stretch of the imagination to assume that this boy had likely been living on the streets for years. It was still early and most of the cooks hadn't shown up for breakfast, so I went to the pantry to grab something simple. As I was walking out of the storeroom, the boy surprised me, blocking my way. "Do you believe in God, Father?" he whispered. I smiled softly as I placed my hand on his right shoulder. "I think I would be in the wrong profession if I did not believe, my child." I tried to go around, but his feet were planted squarely on the ground, refusing to budge. Something was troubling this boy, and I felt obligated to continue our conversation. "Have you lost your faith in our Lord?" I asked. "If God exists, why does evil exist? Is God evil?" the boy asked as he grabbed my hand. He looked confused and heartbroken, as if someone had just taken away his entire world. "Let's sit and break bread. Maybe then I can help you find comfort for your soul," I suggested. Reluctantly, he agreed, as long as he had a firm hand in mine, and we walked together back to the table where I prepared the meal. Now tell me, what is troubling you? He fidgeted as he watched me and muttered, I think evil people outnumber good, and that no one protects the good. No one cares, not even God. Has something happened in your life recently that has led to this crisis of faith? I asked. He bit his lip, and I saw a twitch in his hands. I was right. He was hiding something. My child, you are in the house of God. You can lay your sins bare, I told him as I pushed the plate of food towards his outstretched hands. I'm not a bad person, he insisted, as he started to scarf down the food. We have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. If you come to him in repentance, he can help you, I replied. I've learned over the years that there are certain ways that you can make a person talk, to unburden whatever guilt they have. I could tell that the boy was going to tell me what was on his mind. It was just a matter of coaxing him, to make him feel at ease. I haven't done anything wrong, the boy answered, getting more upset. Have you ever considered doing something bad though? I countered, and that made him more uncomfortable. I didn't want him to completely clamp up when he was so close to saying what was on his mind, and so I changed the topic and discussed the up-and-coming worship services we would have there. You can feel free to attend any of these, I said. I've thought about hurting people before. Is that a sin? He blurted out. I had to choose my words carefully. I didn't want him to think that he couldn't open up further to me. I think that God understands that we all have sinful inclinations, but it's when we act upon them that can be detrimental, I responded. How is something considered a sin, and something not? I paused, a bit perplexed by that. Even after all my years as a pastor, it wasn't exactly an easy thing to pin down. God gave us a conscience, my son. If it feels wrong, if you are consumed with guilt, then you know it is wrong, I told him. He mulled over that for a moment before remarking, So if you don't feel bad, it isn't a sin. I sighed. It's a bit more complicated than that, I'm afraid. How are we to decide what we should feel bad about or not? As I explained, our God-given conscience can guide us. He was leading towards some special purpose, I could tell. It was simply a matter of having him say this aloud. I think God punishing the wicked is a sin, he whispered. Because you think it is not always a case of black and white, I guessed. He nodded slowly. God works in mysterious ways. We cannot decide how he perceives sin. But if we punish those we consider wicked, it would be. So why does God get a free pass? The boy muttered in frustration. His ways are higher than our ways, I counseled the child. Well, then I want to be like God, knowing good and bad, he spat out, and then looked at me squarely in the eye. Would it be such a sin if I was trying to be like God? I think that if we follow in his footsteps, that's the closest to perfection we can ever come, I told him. The storm thundered loudly outside, and the boy finished his meal before thanking me. You've been very kind, Father, he said as he tossed his utensils away. There's no need to leave now. Not in this weather, I advised him, Something told me that I should keep there, but the boy wasn't compelled to listen. His desire for vengeance and quest to right whatever personal wrong sounded like it had the potential to spill over and cause all kinds of problems if he acted on it. "It must be hard being God," he whispered as he stood at the door. And then he laughed. I watched him go, concerned by the ominous message of his words, but knew little of what to do about them. Later that same week, I found in the paper good reason for my concern. School shooting renders 8 in critical condition at hospital. 3 more dead including shooter, it said. All the Hail Marys at my disposal felt hollow that day, because I was certain that by letting him unburden his soul, I had given that young boy the tools to feel like God. I wonder then, if that made me the devil. As you can imagine, you have to be able to keep secrets to become a priest. Heck, it's probably in the job requirement somewhere. We are the keepers of vows broken and troubled spirits, the ones that are supposed to take these things to our grave. I wonder often though, by becoming the ones to carry the load of others, are we in fact compiling our own sins more and more? Is there any kind of salvation for us? I have a lot of secrets, some that I never plan to share with you or anyone else. But since I've decided to continue with the confessions that troubled my own soul, I figured it's best to take the time to share one that I actually wanted to keep hidden from the world. It was a long time ago, back when I was young and didn't even fully understand what the seal of confession meant. I was practicing underneath my father and trying my best to handle some of the heavy stuff thrown at me, but I was at the most 26. Straight out of a class of divinity. The most confessionals I had heard were the ones that my fellow classmates told to each other as idle gossip. Often I would spend the minutes before seminaries trying to determine who would make the cut and who would likely wind up falling out of class. Anyway, there was one time after such a course that I went to the church where my father often preached, and he had just finished wiping down the choir seats. He called out to me, and I was going on about different members of my class, when he chided me for spreading idle gossip. "Sorry, Father," I said sheepishly. "I actually didn't even know we were supposed to talk about such things. There was so much I didn't know." But my father felt obligated to tell me something that day. "Son, I want you to know I'm proud of you for sticking to your courses. Mom would have been proud of you too," he said. "I miss her," I admitted. My mother was a devout nun, and had actually broken her sacred oath to have me. "Don't. You don't know half of what I saw," he warned as he sat down at the pews and rubbed his chin tiredly. "Dad, how can you say that? She loved us more than life itself," I told him. "There's a lot you don't know, but maybe it's time you did. Take a seat. It's time I told you my confession," he said, patting the wooden pew alongside him. I did as he requested, and I held my breath, realizing that his tone and demeanor had suddenly changed. Whatever he wanted to tell me was of grave importance. "Son, your mother was many things. A capable housewife, a loving mother, but she also had problems. She resented having you and giving up the life she had at the convent. She hid this from you and often took out her frustration on me," he said. "She didn't want me," I asked in shock. "It's not that at all. It was more a matter of the fact that she thought God was against her because of disobeying the rules of celibacy. She broke her sacred oath. The diocese she was associated with shunned her. She married me. a non-believer at the town and experienced the full power of the church going against her. They expelled her from the congregation. Dad told me. That's horrible. I thought we were supposed to be forgiving, I said. Some of the clergy take the views of the word to the extreme. They saw no other way for her to be saved. They sent her to the devil in a way. I think she became one because of the ostracization, he admitted. I never saw her act violently toward me. I wouldn't allow that, of course. That's why she died before she saw you become a man. I killed her, he said, looking down at his hands. Immediately I stood up, horrified at the revelation my father had just given me. That can't be true. Why would you do that? I asked. She wanted to kill you multiple times. Do you remember as a child those times you often fell asleep and then forgot what day it was? She was drugging you, trying to find the right dosage to make it look like an accident, he exclaimed. Why did you never tell me this? I shouted. Because I was in fear of her. Your mother was not a sane woman. She often would chant bizarre omens at night when she couldn't sleep. She had sold her soul to the devil before I even knew that such evil existed. The night she died, she told me that she had gotten a vision from God. She claimed you were the Antichrist, he proclaimed. That's nonsense, I said, shaken to the core for all that he was revealing. She planned to drive a stake through your heart and watch you bleed out. She didn't care about the consequences any longer. She was convinced God had given her the sacred command to finish you. So I did the only thing I could think to do. He paused, tears welling up in his eyes as he explained. I suffocated her, grabbed her pillow and shoved her down to keep you from hearing the screams. I wanted her to be gone from life. I was tired of the lies, of the shame she brought us. I felt my hands shake and my lips tremble. I wanted to throttle him to the floor and choke the life out of him. But then I realized why he had to tell me. This had been consuming him with guilt for so long to make me live a lie. You didn't want me to stop loving her, I said softly. I didn't, and you can't. Your mother was sick. She needed help that I could not offer, he admitted. I told my father I forgave him, even if at the time I was seething with rage and confusion. He told me that he loved me, and he went home alone. That night, I decided to visit him and make things right between us. I promised I would keep his secret and forgive my mother too. But it was too little, too late. I found him in the bedroom, dead from asphyxiation. Someone had done the same to him that had happened to my mother, crushing his windpipe and suffocating him. I called authorities right away to have them scrub the room, confused as to how this crime could even happen. But they found not even the trace of fingerprints anywhere. Must be a suicide, one of the officers said. I didn't see how that could be possible, so when they left, I did my own investigation, searching for clues that maybe they had missed. Eventually, I pushed aside the furniture and found another secret that my father had been keeping. It was a small chest filled with memories and letters from my mother. I had never known that she had kept all of these trinkets from my childhood. On the top of the trinkets was a note, freshly written, that sent chills down my spine. Your father loves you. Your mother hates you. One of them is lying. Now that both are dead, which do you think is which? I don't know who put it there, nor do I know how they knew my family, but one thing I know for sure. After that night, I resolved to begin taking confessions. I figure if I kept listening, One day, I would find out the truth. We are good secret keepers, you see. And you know what my secret is. That you think your secret is safe with me. There are a lot of different opinions about men who join the clergy. Most of them are negative, and for good reason. All you have to do is turn on the news to see just how bad things have gotten for children out there. And perverts who hide behind offices of stature are the worst. I actually joined the priesthood to change all of that. I figured if I could help teach others to let God into their hearts, that healing would be better and easier. But that doesn't always work. Sometimes evil still exists. Sometimes there is no help for some people. This is about one such person. Do you think we could talk, Father? The man in question was dressed like a lawyer, with a suit and tie and a badge that told me he came from a private academy a few miles away. I don't normally take confessions after Sunday service, simply because I have to help with the meals and the other routine activities, but there was something about the man's voice that told me he was a troubled soul. I told my deacon that I would be a little late to the meal, and gestured for the young educator to come into my private study. "Is the weekend finding you well, Father?" he asked as he closed the door. "As well as can be expected. But come now, I know you didn't visit me merely to discuss my health. Something is weighing on your mind," I told him. "You've been here quite a while, Father. I suppose there is no pulling the wool over your eyes," he said. I smirked and said nothing, allowing him to continue. "You have likely noticed that our school is expanded now to include programs for both boys and girls. We've had an increase in attendance by 65%. Well, that sounds like the Lord has blessed you and your other teachers in a large way," I told him. I wish I could say that was something to smile about, but it isn't. There have been several instances lately that have left me disturbed, Father, and I'm uncertain what I should do. My heart is torn between what I know to be wrong and selfish desires, the teacher said. His words made me curious. I could tell that he was struggling to explain what was going on. "Well, I am not the judge of your actions. You can speak your mind freely," I said, steeling myself for what I could only fathom would come next. "The girls, Father. I can't help but to look at them. The school makes them wear these short uniforms and..." He paused and stumbled as he saw my eyes widened. I had anticipated something shocking, but this was far worse. Terrifying. Mortifying. Have you ever?" I asked, trying to find the words. No, I couldn't. At least, I haven't yet. But the thoughts plague me, Father. Can you sin because of having impure thoughts? Am I an evil person for this?" he asked. I did my best to clear my throat. Like I said before, I know that bad exists in the world. I'm not a fool to say otherwise. But it was difficult to determine if this person was fully turned towards sin, or merely struggling with the inclination. "Tell me truthfully, is there any of the children you are more drawn to?" I asked carefully. He gave me a name without hesitation and added, "I've done all I can to keep from being near her. Damn her. She entices me in ways that no other ever could. Father, it should be a sin for any lady, no matter the age, to look so good," he complained. His tongue betrayed him. I could tell that he had a desire that was searching for an excuse, and it infuriated me. He didn't come here for confession, but to be given permission to continue these impure thoughts. "And you've struggled with this for how long?" I asked. "Months. Is it the devil? Have I become possessed? Can I stop this from happening? Or is it fate? He asked. His tone further indicated he was trying to find something to give him a reason as to why he was so twisted in his thinking, but I didn't want to even give a suggestion. All I can say for sure is that you must return to the academy immediately and get down on your knees and beg for forgiveness, I told him as I stood up and I opened the door. So you think that I am truly lost? The educator asked in shock. I think this is one of those cases where I can't even provide the answers, I said, trying to help him gather his things. And then something shocking happened. He became angry with me. I came here for help, and you turned me away. I thought the church welcomed all, he said, standing over me as his fist clenched up. I immediately saw fury in his eyes. It was awakening to become something criminal. Sir, I've been in this profession for many years, and I have always offered forgiveness to all those who come to me, but it has always been deserved. You have offered nothing to show me you can have the same treatment, I told him indignantly. The educator said nothing, storming out with his vile thoughts and no excuse to continue them. Part of me felt grateful that I had at least made him realize the putrid, frightening ideas he was lingering on that could corrupt and destroy. But I soon learned it wasn't enough. It was a few weeks after that initial confession that I was hearing gossip amid the pews. People were talking about missing children from the nearby academy, 2 girls and a teacher. I stopped the deacon after one Thursday worship to get the full scoop. It's horrible, Father. Word is that one of the educators took 2 of the children and ran, somewhere into the woods, or so the papers say, he told me. My blood boiled. I knew immediately it had to be the same man that I had spoken with. He had acted on his sinful inclinations, and I hated myself for ever thinking he would listen to reason. I said a prayer to God, trying to decide what the right course would be to make, but there weren't any scriptures I could recall that told me how to act. I spent the next few days researching as much as I could about the school, the teacher, and the surrounding area. It took some time, but I found the place where I figured the teacher could hide for weeks without being noticed. An abandoned windmill about 3 miles up into the woods and north of the school. It could be about an hour hike in good weather, but the rocky incline would deter any ordinary campers. I resolved the following evening to go and see for myself. It was stormy. The hills were saturated with mud and the smell of burnt wood. I imagined that the teacher was using a small bonfire to keep the children warm, as he used them like the animal he was. I closed my eyes and I asked God to watch over them long enough until I arrived. But sadly, I don't think that he was listening. In the windmill, I found those girls, shackled and naked, treated like they were nothing. They were malnourished and hardly clinging to life, and couldn't even open their eyes when I tried to get their attention. This evil man had decided my refusal to forgive him was his excuse to commit this desire incessantly. I used my robes to cover them and tried to help them free themselves of their bonds, but I never got the chance. The sound of a gun discharging rang through my ears, and the first girl fell backwards. And then I turned to see the vile man enter the hut, a smile on his face. Well, well, if it isn't the Father Superior himself. Come to finally forgive me, Father. He sneered as he holstered his weapon. I came to stop you, to put a stop to you permanently, I responded. He nearly laughed, thinking that I was bluffing. But what I had seen here was enough to push any sane man over the edge. I tackled him to the ground and pushed him out the door into the mucky overgrowth, my fingers wrapping around his neck as I choked him. He fought back valiantly, trying to kick and scream as he spat and clawed at me. He grabbed at the nearby stone and smashed it against my hand, but somehow I still held firm to his neck. I wanted to see the life drain from his evil eyes. I needed to know that I was given the chance to snuff out this wickedness. And then finally, his body went limp. He was gone. I tossed down his corpse into the mud and let the rain wipe sweat off my brow. I returned to the mill to try and save the other girl, but again, I was too late. I collapsed on my knees when I realized that I was too late for both of them, asking God why he had allowed this to happen. I even contacted the police, thinking that maybe God would punish me for this in some way because of my inability to act. But instead, all they did was collect the bodies and send the teacher's corpse to the morgue. Not even an examination was given. One officer said that it was better that a bad man be dead, and I realized immediately why this had happened the way that it did. God had brought this evil to my doorstep, intending for me to be the one to end his days. I had failed to act quickly enough, and as a result, more had suffered. I should have killed him the day that he came to the church. I walked back to my own private apartment and told the Lord that I was thankful, because this man also helped me to see what I was meant to do. What I could do before others got hurt, I thought grimly. And from then on, I've taken confessions on Sunday too, in hopes of finding more evil men like that teacher. They won't have a prayer left when I'm done with them. Helping people find peace can be a tricky business. Over the years, I've come to realize a lot of times people don't know what's the best for them. When they tell me their deepest secrets, it reveals a part of human nature that I think a lot of us are trying to suppress. That being, most people don't believe in God. The reason I say this with such certainty is because of an experience I had some time ago, taking the last rites of an inmate on death row. It wasn't the first time that I had done something like this, nor would it be the last. I think these final moments are one of the few times we as a species actually admit how lost we are without our creator. There's something intimate about knowing you are about to die. Suddenly all the sins you've tried to hide are rushing to the surface. You are desperate to gain salvation no matter what, as though a few moments of truth could overturn a life of lies. I would be lying to myself if I said that I had pity for this particular prisoner. They had reveled in wickedness to a great degree. So when the warden first contacted me and told me that they were requesting last rites, I considered denying them. I had had enough of false piety. But still, that little voice inside of me told me I needed to go. I think it was God working out his purpose for me, really. He knew I needed to be there. When I arrived, the warden told me that the execution was scheduled for the next morning. Not much time to lay bare all the wrongs this prisoner had done, but perhaps enough for what they felt mattered the most. "Father, you came. I had started to lose faith," he admitted as the cell doors opened. I saw that the prisoner was already shackled to a table to prevent them from doing any harm to me. "The warden has only given us 1 hour to speak, my child. So if there is something more pertinent on your mind, I recommend that you start with that," I said as I laid my King James down in front of him. "I've come to terms with all the evil I have done. Make no mistake. I do believe that by telling you my demons that I can be free of them," the prisoner told me. His words baffled me. "Are you saying that you brought me here simply to waste my time?" I asked in irritation. "No, forgive me, Father. It's hard to explain because I feel it is imperative that I properly reveal to you what has been happening here in this hell," he said. "And who are you to decide what is evil or not?" I countered. Because all my life I have slept with it. I breathed it and experienced the dark. Those who serve the devil can't hide from one another. It's like staring into the midday sun. And there is one here claiming to mete out justice. But in reality, he has subverted the word of God. The killer told me. "And who do you claim is causing this much suffering?" I asked. "The warden. I have seen him sneak into the woman's ward and then return reeking of sex. And I speak with them days later. They are covered in scars. He brands them too, with a mark like this." He paused and showed me a burn that he had on his left leg. It resembled the Holy Trinity, and I felt immediately sickened by the implication of this perversion. "How can I be sure you are telling the truth? It's not like he will openly confess to any of this," I pointed out. "I already told you, I have nothing left to lose. It's not like I expect them to overturn my sentence. In fact, I know that I'm getting exactly what I deserve," he argued. I felt a crisis of conscience. What this cold-blooded monster said had made sense. I had seen too many times the fact that being at death's door brought out the truth. The question thus became how to verify what he said. I stood up and I tapped on the bars excitedly, attempting to get the attention of the guard. "What do you hope to do? He will never admit to any of this," the prisoner stated. "I have my ways," I responded as the warden arrived. "What's all this then?" he asked, stepping inside the cell. "Apologies. The prisoner has made some serious accusations against you that must be dealt with immediately," I said calmly. I saw the expression on the inmate sour, thinking that I had ratted him out. But my intentions were as pure as snow. There is a lot that we are taught to determine the inner spirit of a person. Watching body language, listening to the tone of their voice. In order to provide solace for their soul, a priest must be certain that they are able to read a person properly. Everything that happened in the next minute told me that this warden was in fact a false angel. First, he laughed, and then he moved towards the prisoner and yanked him by the hair and commented, "This one has had it in for me probably since day one. What story did he spin to you, father? Maybe the one where I forced him to eat shit. He'll slay anything that he has to if it gives him the chance to get a leg up against me one last time." He spat in the man's face, and I found my hands beginning to twitch. "Do you think that if the roles were reversed, you would do the same? Try and take advantage of my empathy?" I asked. I was careful with my words, but I anticipated the answer. "Well, of course I would. If I had such a dark heart, I wouldn't stop trying to cause pain just because it was my last day on God's green earth." He sneered. His back was turned to me, and with that confirmation of his own desire for evil, I made a choice as well. With one swift movement, I grabbed the shackles of the prisoner and wrapped them around the warden's throat. I held him down and I gave the inmate a nod. The vile man didn't hesitate and started to tug at the chains. Instantly, the warden started to struggle to breathe, and I grabbed him to look me in the eye. "You have but one chance to make things right with God. Tell me, do you seek forgiveness?" He nodded as he kept losing his life force, gasping and gagging as the prisoner tugged harder. And then I shook my head and realized a deeper truth. "You may want to be absolved, but you do not deserve it," I decided as I stepped out of the cell. I could hear him try to scream for mercy as I walked towards the front. A few of the guards were starting to run towards the cell, but it was too late. After I left, the prison came under investigation, and it was found that several guards were equally active in their unyielding wickedness. It actually made me admire what that sinner had the courage to do, for although he was already facing damnation, he faced down a greater evil. I wondered if I could ever gain such courage. It can be dangerous to leave things in God's hands though, For although I confronted and took down an agent of Satan, this only stirred others to be aware of me. I think it was a week or two after the whole ordeal that I found a scrawled note in the pews, supposedly discarded, but clearly meant for me. A threat. You have seen the darkness, but be warned, it has also seen you, lest you wind up like your parents. I crumpled up the note and felt a chill run to and down my spine, realizing how close I was to my own damnation. And most frightening of it all to me was that I was ready for it. A crisis of faith often is considered a sign of weakness for anyone who devoted their life to the church. After all, how can you help others if you cannot help yourself? I think I would be lying if I said such situations haven't happened to me during my many years as a man of the cloth, but none perhaps as disturbing as the one surrounding the 5 sinners. You could tell that they had an impact on me simply by that moniker, because unlike other cases, this I have not been able to resolve. I worry I may not be able to actually while I am on this earth. They didn't all come on the same day. I guess if they did, I would have thought that was proof enough of a conspiracy and dismissed the entire thing. But as it turned out, the 5 sinners that all connected to one another were actually years apart from one another. The first one was probably back in the 90s, and the only reason they were so interesting was because of how they were dressed, like they had stepped out of another time entirely. Father, I'm so sorry to be a bother, but something has been weighing on my mind. The man told me as he hurried into the church and caught my attention with his snazzy suit and tie, like he had just escaped a mob from the 1930s. It's never a bother when you need to speak of what is troubling you, I told him. To be honest, it actually was a bother because I had spent the entire week trying to finish up papers on theology for a college course that I had been doing part-time, but I knew better than to turn away a troubled heart. I think I'm being followed, but not by any man actually. It's the devil. I think that he has plans for me. He wants to corrupt my heart and used it for some foul purpose. The man told me as he rubbed his hands together and tried to convince me that he was being stalked by Satan. I'll admit I was tired, so I was somewhat methodical with my response. The days of biblical judgment are long past us. God and the devil, they are battling each other for dominance now. Our job is to prove our faith to the one who gave his son for us, so the feelings you have are natural. The devil is attacking all of the faithful. I can guarantee you though that the strength you are showing today by being concerned of this is proof enough of your devotion to our Lord and Savior, I told him. Thankfully, he seemed relieved by this reasoning and he went on his way, and I put him and his concerns out of my mind. As you may be aware from some of my other experiences that I have shared, I've had my fair share of wrestling with demons. I don't think I was completely qualified to help others handle theirs just yet. This is why it was interesting that a few months later, a woman entered the chapel, speaking of a similar premonition that she was experiencing. Like a feeling of darkness that is enveloping my very soul, Father. Do you think that the wicked one is coming for me? She asked. Not only were her concerns similar to the strange man from months back, her dress was too. May I ask you, child, what is your vocation? Why are you dressed in such a manner? I asked her. She didn't seem to understand why I was even asking that. Are you going to help me or not? Can you cleanse my spirit? I sighed and apologized. You seem pure in faith, righteous and full of strength for the Lord. That alone could be why you think that Satan himself is attacking. But do you feel inclined to give in to temptation? Have you ever wavered from your devotion, your prayers? She firmly declared the opposite, and her conviction told me it was the truth, so I sent her on her way with my blessing. Admittedly though, I didn't truly consider this to be such a bizarre occurrence until the third person came in. This one expanded on the general concern of the other two. Not only was he convinced that the devil was after him, but he felt that Lucifer was forcing him to do something vile. There are people in my life that have wronged me. I've never wished ill upon them until now. I've never thought that I was better than anyone else. My accomplishments are enough to be satisfied by, he admitted. But you think that these dark thoughts will eventually manifest themselves, I guessed. In later years, such a display of anger and emotion might have prompted me to take a swift action against the sinner, to prevent the loss of further bloodshed. But as it stands, I only offered him prayers and had promised before me that he would remain a disciple of the Christ. But still though, his concerns and their similar connections to the other confessions of influence from the spirit realm had me wondering, could the search I was making to find my family's killer be drawing evil upon the congregation that I was serving? I decided to find out for sure by contacting an older member of the diocese that had taught me. Well versed in scripture and perhaps a mentor and father figure, I felt confident in going to him and sharing my concerns. Although I do not intend to reveal his true identity here, for the sake of avoiding confusion in this text, I will call him Father March. I arranged to have lunch with him that following Monday, the day before our annual revival, and explained to him my concerns in the best way that I could. It feels like more than mere coincidence to see that 3 different people are offering up the same confession in such a short period of time, I told him. March listened intently, his brow furrowed at certain parts where I explained that I felt the devil might be targeting me, but thankfully he didn't ask for an explanation. Clearly, there is a reason that you want to investigate. So what is stopping you? Reach out to these people. Find the connection that others have not, he told me. And so I did, or at least tried. I soon found that to be impossible because all 3 of these people had apparently vanished. I think this was actually the reason I installed the security camera in the chapel, to keep an eye on anyone suspicious who might be connected to them. For some reason, when my search came up dry, I was sure that foul play was involved. I told March the same, worried for my congregation's safety. This time he zeroed in on my obsession with finding the person who had killed my mother and father, my angel of death. It may be time to stop the search for answers. Others are being harmed by your desire for revenge. It is no longer a divine assignment when the people you mean to save are caught in the crosshairs, he told me. I didn't expect him to understand, but the fact that he was confirming my fears told me something else entirely. Somehow or another, these 5 people had been connected to my family, to the reason they were killed, and someone was covering that up. A week later, a 4th individual came with the same confessional. They were frantic and crying, desperate for help. "Why is this happening to me?" they asked. I felt almost obligated to spout my theory. "I want to show you something," I said, taking the man from the confessional booth to my private chambers. Although I didn't have actual photographs of the other 3, that I had employed a sketch artist to provide me details regarding the people that had scammed me over the years. "Do you know anyone that matches these descriptions?" I asked. They studied it and shook their heads, offering up an equally bizarre answer. "Never been a history buff, but they look like they're from the Prohibition," the man said as he adjusted his own strangely colored suit. This time, however, I didn't simply accept his answer. I asked him to keep in touch, and I kept tabs on him. Much to my chagrin, or perhaps astonishment, he was later found dead. I had to go identify the body, trying my best to piece together how this all fit together. March was there with me, insisting that with so much death and destruction on its path, perhaps I would need to go alone. There is something here. I have kept a log of every confession I ever took, trying to tie them back to that fateful night. Perhaps the killer is worried I'm close to the truth. But how do these people connect to me? I told Marge. Either way, you have a choice to make. There are good people in your congregation that you need more than these criminals. More than you may ever realize. Perhaps that is what these tests are telling you. To focus on what really matters rather than something that may lead nowhere, he insisted. I wanted to follow his advice. I prayed to God so many nights, asking him to take the cup from me. But then the fifth one came to me, literally knocking on my door while I attempted medication and meditation. Somehow I knew, simply by the dress, that this was another confessor connected to the four that I could not solve. And his anxious eyes turned towards me, and I knew for certain. What is it? What has happened? I asked. Father Marge, I think he may be dying. He had you in his emergency contacts. I think I killed him. I dropped everything and followed him to the chapel. My friend, my mentor, was lying in a pool of blood, blubbering in ancient tongue. Seeing him there, hardly able to move as paramedics tirelessly tried to save him, it left me numb. I had failed to listen to his warning that others would be hurt by my selfishness. After the fifth one was taken away by the police, I stole a moment of their time to ask them exactly how they felt the devil compelled them to do this crime. I wish I could explain it, Father. All I know for sure is I was supposed to give you a message as well, he told me. From Lucifer himself. Well, this I need to hear, I said, crossing my arms and listening to the crazed man. It isn't over, he said with a quirky smile, and then he was taken away by the authorities. I've kept that warning in my mind for years now, cautiously waiting for the other shoe to drop. As I've gotten closer to the truth, I have seen others harmed as well. But it doesn't matter. I'm ready for the supernatural battle to go down. I know it will be soon, because even as I shared this, I had a sixth person arrive at my chapel with their own confession. I need to do something wrong, Father. I think if I don't, the devil will hurt others, she said. This was only a week or so ago, telling me that my efforts to make the people who had taken March from me would pay off. So of course, I gave this messenger only one response. Tell your devil that I'm ready to face him. This crisis of my faith was about to become a rite of passage. Are you ready to meet your maker? Oftentimes during my sermons, I've told my congregation that they need to take an account of their affairs here on earth, while they still have time. Since our time here on earth is so limited, it only makes sense that we need to be sure that everything is in order before we go to heaven. That's why I started my journey towards truth years ago, and why I thought that after the death of my colleague, Father March, I was closer to the answers I needed than ever before. But I was just a fly being lured into a deeper web of lies and villainy. And it took only one more confession for me to realize how far off the path to life I was. I want to kill you. It's amazing how 5 simple words can change your life. The woman was perhaps only 20 or 21, not aware of what sort of sin she would be committing simply by even uttering those words. They definitely caught my attention. Do I know you? I asked, feeling a bit standoffish because of her statement. She pulled out her knife from her coat pocket and jabbed it into the air, as though she were aiming for my heart. Men like you claim that they help people, hiding amid sheep, You prey on the weak, she told her. Her voice quivered. Her plans were shaky. I could tell she did not have it in her to kill another soul. Who has hurt you? My daughter, I asked. Now her eyes welled with tears and she dropped her weapon. She collapsed in my arms with a sob. Gently I held her, waiting for her to explain what monster had made her feel so angry. There were so many out there, and I knew that my own form of divine justice would never reach them all. But still, I needed to help this lost sheep somehow. A man of the diocese. He studied the scriptures as same as you. He made the sacred oath. But he did not keep his vow to God. He lusted after me. He told me that he would keep me safe and protect me. And in my moment of weakness, I trusted him, and he took my most sacred possession from me, against my will, the woman exclaimed. Hearing such an act of depravity was enough to make my blood boil. It took a unique sick mind to do this to a woman, to steal her virginity like she were some kind of dog. Who would do this? Did you report them? I asked. I tried, but none would believe me. I told everyone that had ears, and they laughed at me. They said I was the problem. I lost everything because of trying to defend my womanhood, she said as she clutched my arms tight. And this false pastor, where is he now? I wondered. Dead. By my hand, she said in a whisper. I felt a cold sweat cover my neck. To think about murder was one thing, but this woman had already committed the sin. I have another confession to make to you, Father, she said as she wiped her tears away. Her tone suddenly had changed as well. You can tell me anything, I told her. I loosened my grip on her and waited for another horrible crime to be told to me. But instead, this woman surprised me with a jab to my stomach. Her left hand had strayed behind her back, and a small knife was now plunged into my lower abdomen. I don't think you're a sinner, but I think you deserve to die, she told me as she twisted the knife and ran. I fell down to my knees, watching as blood seeped out of my black robe. If I attempted to pull the weapon out, it would simply get worse. I had to find a hospital, and quickly. Slowly I stood up, holding the knife close to my skin, and hoping that the loss of blood wouldn't make me go faint. The church was empty. The woman a ghost now as she left the parking lot to go spread her misguided anger towards others. I had to get help. My head started to spin as I pushed open my private office and reached for the breaker box against the eastern wall. It was a blind prayer to use the box as a way to communicate to the outside world. Flipping the switches on and off would alert some curious passerby, or so I hoped. I could only keep doing it 13 times, when the loss of blood and the pain that was coursing through my body became too much. I fell to the floor and I looked at the knife. Coming close to death makes you reevaluate everything. I wondered if all of the different paths that I had taken to get justice were the reason that I was now facing this evil. The pain was so great. Had she laced the blade with some kind of poison? I thought of faithful men of old, and I wondered if it was possible that any would lend their ears to my prayers now. I called out to them, my faith shaken as I felt my body becoming lighter and lighter. I could even see the glory of our Lord, laying there and waiting for him to call me home. That isn't what happened though. Instead, I heard footsteps enter the chapel. Someone called out my name. Weakly I responded. Saint Paul had heard my prayers and I was saved. Or so I thought. My rescuer was silent, carrying me like a lost lamb from the chapel. I opened my eyes to thank this guardian angel. But something was wrong. Their eyes didn't show a helpful spirit, but one of pure demonic influence. Whoever this savior was, their intentions weren't pure. As I raised a sound of alarm to try and stop them, a dark hood came over my head. I can only imagine the shroud of Sheol being stronger. When I was given a chance to wake again, my wounds were healed, but my rescuer had not allowed me to see my surroundings. I was lost and confused and waiting for them to speak. When they did, I was surprised to learn that I recognized their voice. Not where I could simply place them amid a crowd, but almost as though we had crossed paths ages ago, the way strangers often do. "Did you feel the pull of the angels?" the voice asked. Before I could respond, the unseen person explained. The woman acted on impulse. She had a desire that could be controlled and manipulated. They are all like that. Simple insects that respond to instructions. Tell them to pray for salvation every week, they ignore you. But make them beg God for their life. That's how you make them a lifelong believer. I tried to speak, only to find that something sealed my mouth shut. Was it a wire? It only made my pain increase to even try and open my jaw. "I did this for you to show you that you are wasting your time with them. You are ignoring your true calling," the stranger said. My tension was tenfold. The fact that they knew more about my inner world than I had anticipated was frightening. It told me a shocking truth. This was my devil, the one that I had been hunting. As though to confirm, the stranger said, "I've heard that you've been looking for me. And I'm sure you have thought many times that you were close to finding me. Well, you need to hear me speak, Father. I've only made you believe that you were close. You are no closer to finding me than you were the day you started. And now you will take this reminder with you for the rest of your days. I will come to you when I want, and take what I want. This is how it will work. I am your devil and your God. You will beg for mercy and ask for deliverance." I felt a sharp blade against the side of my head, and then it slashed down against my ear, and I felt it leave my body. I tried to scream, and I broke the stitches in my mind as I felt the blood from my dismembered head trickle down. The stranger laughed contemptuously. "You will live," he said. He drugged me again and tossed me amid a grove of trees, bandaging my wounds and then leaving the rest of my body exposed. I never saw his face, but I desperately asked him what the purpose of this was. "I need to know. Why did you pick me?" I asked. The stranger was a far distance now as I hobbled away. "Because you did not answer our call. Because you chose the path of righteousness. Because you are a Judas." Hearing such condemnation was jarring coming from one so evil. So I had one final question to ask. "What is my purpose then?" I whispered to the dark. I was expecting them to be shook by my courage. But to my surprise, they answered, "You will see soon enough." There is so much that I have shared with all of you in such a short period of time. But throughout it all, I have kept my promise and adhered to avoiding the cardinal rules of concerning confession. Namely that I will never reveal the names of the people who came to me seeking to re-establish their relationship with God, and also that many of the sins I've detailed have been slightly altered to prevent any correlation to actual events. That, however, must change now as I reach a turning point in my findings. There is much that needs to be revealed, and it can only be done properly by explaining to you my close relationship to one of the matriarchs of my own congregation, Sister Tabitha. My connection to her actually started with a confession that I tried to suppress, and it is here on this leg of the journey that I feel compelled to tell you about this event. As part of our monthly revival, many of the sisters in my congregation make it their goal to prepare a meal for the community that wants to come and be refreshed both spiritually and physically. Sister Tabitha has been in charge of this process for at least 5 years now, and I've always admired her tenacity and good spirits. Admittedly, I have often wondered how such a capable woman has not settled down and left the life of a celibate nun for one of marriage. Tabitha was beautiful, smart, and bold, qualities any righteous man should be seeking, yet she remained single. I found out the reason for this unspoken rule one day when a man amid the crowd came to her and pulled her aside, frustrated and angry by the look on his face. He wanted to speak to her about some private matter, and pulled her straight into the confessional booth to do so. The two were unaware that I was on the other side in mediation. Often, I would use that small wooden box to simply relax and enjoy the solitude. But in this case, I heard every word of this malicious man. "Why haven't you made it happen yet? What are you waiting for?" the man asked. Tabitha was scared. She was shaking. "I can't. It isn't right. I've thought about it and prayed about it, and I'm sorry. That life is behind me now," she insisted. Now, I knew very little about Tabitha's past at this point, except that she had not always been with the faith. All I could suspect was that this man was a part of her old ways and was trying to pull her back in. And for that reason alone, I felt I needed to take action. "You have 2 days to decide, and then I will take action for you," the stranger demanded, leaving her alone in tears in the confessional. I felt guilty for listening in on their private conversation, but it wasn't quite over yet. As she finished wiping tears from her eyes, Tabitha began to pray. They say it's wrong to listen to someone's prayer when it is a private matter, but what was I to do? In her moment of anguish, she poured her heart out to the Lord, and I discovered the secret she was trying to hide. "O Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Please forgive me my trespasses with this man. Forgive me for not having the strength to overcome his beguiling charm. Give me the strength I need to make it through this trial, to be your servant again," she began. "I have fallen from grace by allowing my body to be tainted by his sin. I have conceived a child against my will. What am I to do, Father? I feel so lost," she remarked. I was speechless. I understood immediately the context of their argument. This angry man had violated her and gotten Tabitha pregnant, and worse, he was forcing her to give up the baby. I was at a loss for words, my blood boiling at the way this sinner had taken control over this faithful sister. I knew, though, that if I did reveal what I knew, her place in the congregation would be gone forever. The diocese would not even consider the circumstances. She would be shunned by all. And so I hid it. And I set in motion circumstances to take this unkept man and remove him from Tabitha's life. It appalled me to consider that such a wrathful man had taken control of her body. It reminded me of my own mother. She too had not meant to be taken by my father. What had overcome them? Was it love? Some foolish notion of companionship? I didn't want what happened to my mother to befall Tabitha. So the next time her lover stopped by the chapel to confront her, I took matters into my own hands. "The one you're looking for is not here," I told him frankly. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, sneering at me. I knew that he had no respect for the house of God or my position, so I offered the same lack of concern for his well-being. With one swift stroke, I wrapped my prayer beads around his neck and slammed him down to the pew, his hat smacking against the wooden panel as he began to choke and fight back. I was ready to snuff the life out of this deplorable man. I was so focused on my task that I did not hear Sister Tabitha enter the chapel. She actually watched in silence as I finished off her would-be lover. Once he was gone from this world and I caught my breath, Our eyes met and she quietly bowed her head and remarked, "Father, what have you done? Better to remove a sinner than to let an entire congregation succumb to the devil." She covered her mouth in shock as she leaned over to check her lover and cover his eyes. "This was not your call to make. You cannot judge. Only God is given that right," she said to me. "Sister, I know what he did to your body, how he took your virginity. You cannot let this brute have his way over you," I told her. She was slowly wobbling forward, clutching her belly, and then she collapsed next to her lover, grabbing his hand and remarking, "Even so, even the most vile of men that serve the devil have a chance to change." "You're deluding yourself, sister. He is no different than my father, or thousands of others that have come and taken advantage of women," I told her. She was crying, angry over my actions. I was speechless to understand her devotion to this monster. And then I understood, as she placed her hand against her stomach again. "You already gave up the child," I said breathlessly. She didn't even respond. She just spat on the floor and kept crying. "Sister, I tried so hard to keep you safe. This is my confession to you, that men like him do not deserve to walk this earth. Let him suffer the fate he forced upon your unborn," I insisted. Tabitha was so grief-stricken by the trauma this man had put her through, I wasn't sure that she would listen to me. "I will see to it he gets the help he deserves. You've done enough, Father. Go and ask for God's mercy for this sin of yours," she insisted. I hesitated, wondering if she would really follow through with it. Fearfully, I left the chapel and walked the church gardens, thinking of how far I had gone off the beaten path. Was Tabitha right? Was I now in a battle over my own soul? In my path to take down the unrighteousness, I had lost sight of the Lord's light. It frightened me so much that I had to go home. I begged the Lord to let me return to him. I was prepared to stop this mission of mine because of her words. "This child of God has shown me that no revenge is worth losing my relationship with you," I said in prayer. It felt that night as though the temptation had left me. I asked the Lord for guidance on how I should move forward, to escape this revenge I had fantasized about for most of my life. The answer came when I returned to church the next day. It was time to prepare for our Sunday Mass, and I needed to be sure that the pews were cleaned. Any evidence left by the sinner could be damning. Instead, as I walked into the chapel, I found my mouth agape, shocked by what Sister Tabitha had done. There on the golden crucifix that adorned our front stage, the man that had taken everything from her was now naked, nailed and condemned by her and her alone. His blood trickled down the steps, his eyes gouged out, and the word bastard was slashed upon his chest. She had turned me away from my task because of the darkness within her own heart. She wanted this to be her victory. As I heard the members of my congregation enter and scream in mortified horror at the sight, I shook my head and smiled. None ever knew what Tabitha had gone through. I told the police it was likely a robber that was coming to steal from the communion when they retrieved the body. They believed me and questioned no sisters in the church. Tabitha did not return for some time, and I even worried that she might have gone into hiding. And then one day, I got a letter from our prayer box. Despite not bearing her name, I knew it to be her. "Forgive me, Father, for the sin we now share, and forgive us for now what we must do together." Again, my prayers had been answered. At last, I had an ally. We have come a long way together, and though there is so much more that I feel I could share, there is still part of me that feels secrets must be kept hidden to protect the people I care for most. People like Sister Tabitha, who had to flee from my congregation for her confession of killing the man. or like my father who was killed for confessing to me his hatred of my mother. I think, though, this part of my journey is closing. I can't help but to feel that you should be a part of these final decisions that shape my life, my very soul. We have been together this far, sharing anguish and tragedy together. It seems only fitting these last few steps be with you as well. It was nearly a year after I got a letter in our prayer box from her that I met with Tabitha again, though not in the way that I had expected. I was watching the news one evening when I saw a blatant satanic symbol plastered across my screen, relating to a local murder. 2 young boys had had their eyes gouged out and they were tied up by their feet, and hung upside down for refusal to worship the devil. It immediately reminded me of the way that my father had been killed, and I wondered if perhaps there was a connection. These poor altar boys that had served here alongside me. I knew what my enemy was doing, attacking what I held most dear. I did not have to wonder much longer, for that very same stormy night, there was a knock at my door. It was nearly 3 in the morning, the witching hour. I didn't understand why anyone would even dream of coming to the church at this hour, but part of my obligation to the Lord is to accept His children regardless of the inconvenience to myself. But still, just to be cautious, I checked these security feeds, and saw the frail petite outline of a woman standing there barely covered in sackcloth. It was clear that she had traveled far and with very few resources to make it here. I rushed to the doors and I pushed them open, another wave of shock rolling over me, as I immediately recognized the fraught face of Sister Tabitha. Immediately, she ran into my arms and hugged my neck, begging for forgiveness over all that she had done. "Please, my daughter, calm yourself. You are in the house of the Lord. There is no need for fear here," I told her. Her lips trembled as she smiled at me and choked back tears. "Oh, Father, I am so thankful that you are all right. When I saw the news, I feared the most," Tabitha told me. "So then you know that the one responsible bears a connection to me?" I asked, still badly needing to know how she knew all of this. "To the Order of the Beast. They are coming for you, and soon. I came here to tell you, to warn you rather, because it is my fault that they have found you after all this time," she confessed. I guided her towards the pantry to give her some fresh food, and had her continue to tell her story. "Are you saying, my dear sister, that you are familiar with these devil worshippers?" I asked. "They are not all born of pure evil, as you might expect. I must confess, their charismatic beliefs washed over me when I left the church. They knew what I had done and helped me through a hard time in my life, when the church had abandoned me," she said. "Yes, often the darkness can transform itself into light," I mused. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "But the same is also apparently true of the God that we serve. Light can become darkness. Think of all the vicious things you have done. You thought that none of us here in the congregation would notice." Tabitha stopped and chided me with a click of her tongue. "But I have been here a long time, Father. Since we were both young, causing problems for the diocese and the pews. I know what the elders said about you. The curses they said that you held," she admitted. I kept my hand on hers and leaned closer. "I only know what my father has told me, that my mother believed me to be the son of the devil, and this is why she wished to kill me. My father kept me safe from her evil for years, until I realized that they were both likely manipulated by forces beyond their purview, likely the same order that you speak of now." She started to pull away, ashamed by what she knew, but I insisted that she tell me. "No more than ever, I need to know. Are they coming for me? Is my congregation in danger?" I asked. "I have never been afraid for my life. I always knew that I was a sinner. But you, Father, you don't know the lengths they will go to make sure you pay for ignoring their dark purpose. I have led them to your doorstep, and for that, I am sorry," she said softly. I opened my mouth to reassure her that she was mistaken, but then I began to hear shouting from outside of the church. "There is no time, they are here. You need to run," she insisted. I shook my head and stood firm. I have expected this my whole life. You are not to blame here. I placed my own soul at risk to confront these demons. If anyone needs to leave, it should be you. I won't let harm come to you, I told her. "I told you once before I would help. Now let me help," she insisted. Suddenly, the glass shattered at the front of my congregation. These dangerous men were coming into my church, armed with blades and pistols and likely feeling like they were Goliaths about to do harm to the nation of Israel. Boldly, I squeezed her hand and I went to confront these men. There were 6 of them, all dressed in dark robes that a monk might wear. I calmly bowed my head. "May you have peace, brothers." My heart was beating out of my chest. At any moment, they could gun me down. They called me by the name that my mother had given me as a child, and I knew that there was no mistake. They were the devils that I had been looking for. "You may not care if you live or die, Father, but we know you have love for this congregation. Come with us now and no harm will come to them," one man insisted. My heart plummeted as I realized that by targeting the people that I cared for, they were in fact taking advantage of me at last. "I will come willingly the same way the Lord did when taken from Jezreel," I told them. Abruptly from the back room, Tabitha rushed out with a gun aimed at one of the thugs. I saw it happen in slow motion as she shot him down, blood shattering from his skull. And then she turned to the next one and did the same. "Father, get down," she told me. Instead, I grabbed one of the golden candles from my front assembly and swung the heavy piece of metal across the distracted front side of the man in front of me. The burning candle flung off and began to torch the carpets of my church as Tabitha and I placed our backs against one another and faced the others. "This is not how I wanted it to be," I told her. "You have no idea what they have in store for you. They will corrupt your heart with dark magic," she insisted. I clenched my teeth and asked our Father in heaven for forgiveness as we mowed down the others and rushed to escape the broken church. The men that were surviving reacted in a way that I expected. They turned on the house of God. As Tabitha and I ran out, I saw them spread the fire further. "They'll burn themselves alive," I realized. "That is a better option in their minds than to have fallen a victim of you," Tabitha explained. I watched in horror as these men torched my church, the old building crashing down around them as Tabitha took my hand and told me that we needed to leave. I clenched my fist and nodded, leaving behind the peace and serenity I knew. Now all that was left was my rage. There is so much I haven't told you, and some of it would likely paint a very different picture of me. I've never claimed to be a child of God. To do so would be too prideful, especially given all the things I've done to get to the truth. But with my congregation gone and my struggle reaching the breaking point, I think it is prudent to reflect on a confession that started this entire journey. My own. It is difficult to understand the musings of one's own heart until it is witnessed by others. And that is what happened to me when I looked through that burnt rubble and discovered an old leather-bound tetragrammaton. It belonged to Father March. And in those pages I discovered I didn't really know myself at all. First entry. One among the diocese came to me with the most interesting of confessions today. A desire for retribution against those that had wronged his family. Truth be told, I've been waiting for this moment for quite some time. The boy's father was never a believer in the scripture, and actually fell in love with one of our wayward nuns. Though I dare not recollect the details of their affair here and now in my memoirs, many in our congregation have felt that the entire arrangement was something out of biblical prophecy. It is better that they keep their eyes towards God rather than these scandals that sway our conviction. That boy, however, I'm quite certain he will follow this goal to seek out the truth about what befell his father. The second entry. He came to me again, this time with a plan to take down the one he feels is responsible for the death of his parents. He is so blind with ambition that he isn't seeing it. This treacherous course that will ultimately destroy him. I told him to steer clear of the temptation, but he is hell-bent on self-destruction. His father confessed to him the truth about what happened to his mother. I can't imagine what it must have been like to know that your own flesh and blood killed the woman that gave birth to you. But he does not understand. It was necessary. That bitch was close to revealing the truth about where the boy came from. For all we know, they might have already. Such a wicked temptress. But such is the folly of those who often want to expose the darkness. The third entry. There are powers in this world that do not come from God. I sought out such powers to learn of the world to come, to see for myself what lay beyond the grave. I know some might call them occult. I call them mystics. These devil worshippers showed to me magic that I have only ever dreamed of possessing. They showed me how to control a man like a puppet, how to make him kill anyone I wanted. It is my confession that I have groomed the boy to be a guardian of the light. I know he struggles with the need to destroy all that is good in this world. That is why his father had to die. That is why we manipulated him to kill that witch. There is no finer task for our disciples than to see to it he is guided to our glory. And soon, with our reach ever expanding, he shall. I stopped reading there, my hands trembling at the revelations and feeling numb inside. The preacher I was a student of, he was the one who had given me over to these serpents. Surely this was why the father had been killed. I remember confessing to him everything, trusting him to keep it, but it led him straight to the pits of hell too. It led to him to be destroyed by these offsprings of the devil. I didn't dare tell Tabitha this. Instead, we found a room for the night in the village and thought of what to do next. I read other entries in Father March's journal, discovering his descent into darkness. And then amid the flurry of madness, I saw him write this. 16th entry. The powers of manipulation have allowed me to send out servants to take down those close to the Father. This boy still refuses our calling though. He continues to fight against us, all because of his stance towards God. But soon, he will realize he was meant for a glorious rising to become Satan's heir, and the one that shall bring him to us is who we shall send as his aid. Is everything all right? A soft knock jolted me, and I turned to see Tabitha at the door. I'd been reading about what March did, what he had went through for me. It's astonishing, I explained as I closed up the book. I never really knew the man. Something told me that she was lying. March had gone through a lot to get deep within the heart of these demons just to become one of them, and he had sent a warning from beyond the grave about her. Why do you suppose they are targeting me? I asked. She chuckled as she sat down at the edge of the bed. They are Satanists. Do they really need a reason? You told me the night of the fire that they would rather die than become my victim. What did you mean by that? I questioned. She fidgeted with her prayer beads. I just meant that I am sure they would hate to be killed by an agent of God. I touched the edges of the worn Bible again. You're lying to me. You were sent to find me. She froze in her posture. Then she smiled and the facade fell away. Confess to me, Father. How bad you want to kill me? I shook my head. Why would I? You have been my helper, my friend. I saved you. And you think that is your calling? To save people? You were meant to be a destroyer." "What do you mean?" "March showed me. It was all arranged ages ago. Your father, the non-believer, violating a woman that was devout in faith. The church told her to abandon the baby, spoke of the omens that would come forth as a result, but still, she insisted on raising you as her own. She saw in you the darkness and tried to hide it, to suppress it. But as you grew, she realized your hate could never be snuffed out, and that's why she tried to kill you. That is why we defeated her. The Magdalene of this sordid tale," Tabitha said, standing up and then pushing a crucifix onto my skin. To my surprise, it burned me and I dropped it. And then she smiled in glee. "March was right. They all were. You are the next Iscariot, the Antichrist born to reign in hell on earth." She bounded toward me, saying sacred oaths I recognized from scripture about exorcism. I don't even know for sure what I did. I confess to you that I probably could have stopped myself, but I didn't. I pushed her from the room we were staying in to the courtyard below, her body breaking apart into a crumpled mess, as I realized that, for a brief moment, the evil she claimed I possessed had overcome my body. Suddenly, all the reasons for my struggle made sense. The dark purpose I was meant for was what my mother had warned me of all those ages ago. I was the spawn of Satan himself. These dark disciples had been trying to lead me to my calling ever since. And I must confess to one last thing. I know that I will refuse this purpose they have given me. I will defy my heritage. But not before I take down the ones that have caused all of this grief, who set things in motion. I will definitely rain down hell on them. May the love of the Lord free you of your sin, and save you and raise you up. I wish I was still authorized to utter those sacred words, but the truth is, I'm not sure I was ever meant to wear these holy garments. The evil that has been a part of my blood since joining the clergy is not going to simply go away because I want it to. It's part of my nature. A permanent mark upon my skin for all to see that I am tainted and unworthy of God's light. Even so, because of my nature, I know that I can make the Lord's light shine on the unrighteous. I saw it firsthand. And now, as I say goodbye to all of you, you can too. I knew what would happen from the moment I started revealing secrets here. It was an invitation to the darkness. With Sister Tabitha gone, I had little left that I could go on to find the evil that was controlling my life. To find my devil, I had to lure them out. That was the purpose of these confessions. Nothing more and nothing less. I knew they would only come for me if they were sure I was ready to be indoctrinated by their wickedness. I wasn't wrong. I sat on the edge of where my church was stood, gazing up at these smoldering bricks and mortar, and wondering if this congregation would ever stand again. It was my fault they were gone. My fault that so many died for what they believed. I thought hard about my own heritage, now that I knew where I came from. To be the spawn of Satan himself. I cannot even describe properly how crushing this was to what little faith I had left. The demon worshippers arrived shortly before sundown. They were dressed like ordinary folk, a simple disguise to hide their unholy ways. The first one offered me a hood to place over my head and remarked, "It is time, Iscariot." I didn't even attempt to fight. I knew that if I was going to get to the bottom of this, I would need to look defeated. I let them pull the hood over my face and they led me away. For all I knew, they could be taking me to my death, but something told me that they had something in mind for my final hour. They had been planning this for generations. I didn't want to disappoint them by not being there to receive my crown of thorns. I didn't know how far we had traveled. All I heard was the roar of the highway, the bumps, the sirens. And then I heard the ocean. It reminded me of my childhood home. The smell of the sea was right against my nostrils as the van came to a stop. I also was sure that I could feel the warmth of a fire. It was large and all-encompassing, and it made me sweat. Suddenly, they pushed me to my knees, and I felt the sand on my clothes as the hood was pulled up from my head. I held my breath as I saw the man in front of me. He was exactly what I had expected to find here in this hellish cult, but still the shock of seeing him again was jarring. "Father Marge, I saw you die," I said breathlessly, as he had approached me and got on his knees as well. "Now the mighty have fallen if you believe that miracles are not possible," he said with a devilish grin. "You sent those sinners to me, didn't you? The 5 strangers who I thought were being possessed," I said as I remembered the bizarre events which I thought led to his death. "I never saw the paramedics pronounce your death. They must have been involved with it, to make me lose faith and hope," I realized. Behind him, I saw a stirring fire that seemed unholy in nature. There were bodies in it keeping the fire burning, likely acolytes that didn't want to adhere to whatever mad scheme he had them involved in. "So, you believe in the resurrection of the Lord, but you can't fathom that the Prince of Darkness can likewise use his powers to bring back his loyal ones. Don't for a second think that your birth was a mere coincidence. It was arranged in the same way the Messiah was ages ago. We are ready for your rise, for the world to see that the second coming of Christ is a lie," March told us. He raised his arms up to the heavens and cackled madly. "If your Savior is so grand, why has he never saved you from us? All the choices you have made led you here. On this holy Easter, you should see for yourself that God is dead." I clenched my fist. Every part of my dark soul wanted to tear him apart, but I knew that was exactly what he wanted. Instead, I stood up and I spit in the ground. "You understand nothing about faith. I thought you were my mentor, but you have simply been goading me along to be your prized slaughterer. That's why you brought me here, isn't it? To kill all of you and then ascend as your Antichrist?" I asked. March smiled. "It is your destiny. Anything else is unacceptable." He passed me his sharpened blade, fully expecting me to submit to his insanity. I held it in my hand and examined the runic symbols. Everything about it felt evil. "This is why you fail, Marge. Why all of your dark purposes fail. Because even if the Lord has abandoned me to you, I shall never abandon him," I said as I quickly cut the blade across my throat. March's eyes widened in shock as he screamed and demanded to his servants to try and save me. I slung the blade wildly towards them, keeping them away as blood spilled out of my throat, and then I pushed myself into their bonfire. I felt the fire lick at my skin as the Satanist tried to save me from my self-sacrifice. I wanted to take away the one thing that they wanted the most. My soul, my servitude. I was going to destroy their mad ambitions. And as I felt my body being torn apart and I collapsed, I thanked the Lord that I had the chance to prove to these wicked men that nothing could separate me from their love. I've heard people say that they have experienced the light of the Lord near to the end of their life. The mysterious, ethereal nature of the pearly gates and voices of St. Peter. I felt certain that the paths that I had taken all my life would leave my final moments in nothing but shadows. Instead, I felt a hand over my head, soft and soothing. It reminded me of my mother. I heard a song that made me think of my baptism, a sweet melody that guided me towards a shining, bright palace. There was a man there. He was standing near to the edge of the tunnel and gazing upon me with approval. Though we did not speak to one another, I knew what he was telling me. The work that I had done on earth was not done. I was deemed righteous for the acts of divine salvation that I had caused. I was to be given a second lease on life, free from the tainted, sinful past that had haunted me so. I saw my Father in heaven, smiling at me as I fell away, telling me how proud he was that I had broken these vile chains. And then I was back on the beach. These evildoers were on top of me, trying to use their body to eat up the flames. Their corpses hardly had any features that made them look like men any longer. I pushed myself up and looked at my own tattered clothes, shocked by the scars I now had on my body. It was a miracle that I had survived. The lies and sins that they had committed to try and submit me to their darkness had no hold on me anymore. I was free. It was a dawning new day, and I knew that I could finally be at peace with myself. I pushed March's body into the blaze and made the sign of the cross. Despite his wayward path, I now knew that all could be saved by God, even those who have been lost altogether. For he is mine, and he can be yours, and I know now that all light and all dark come from him. I am thankful that I was chosen to be the Antichrist. It gave me an opportunity to share with others a message that I think I can now give to you. That the love of the Lord is all-encompassing, that it is the greatest gift of all. So confess your sins, and not to men like me, or those who claim to understand the hearts of man. For now, I see that the truest path to salvation is the one that we make for ourselves, and that the Lord will greet us all in his glory.